Okay, I've got 11 o'clock. Let's get started. My name's Alvis Dunn. I'm an associate professor in the history department. I coordinate Humanities 324. I am also the curriculum coordinator for the Foundations of American Democracy. I'm from Piedmont, North Carolina. Everybody can tell by my accent, I'm sure. And I've been here for 12 years, I think, and teach primarily Latin American history, but lots of other history. Some of you out there are taking humanities with me. Some of you have History 101 with me. There might even be some History 250 students out there. So let's just go ahead and get started. You can see the title there, but before I really start in the program, I want to make a small amendment, or an amendation, as they would have said in the 18th century, to the title of this talk. I want to drop "and beyond." In the truest spirit of the Constitution, which has itself been amended 27 times, I see no reason to project into a beyond. The document that we are gathered today to celebrate already reaches into the beyond. The Constitution is our tomorrow as much as it is our past and our present. So to rewrite the sum of our direction today, we'll go with words that bind a nation, from founding ideas to the Declaration and the Constitution. So over recent months, I've embarked on a very, to me anyway, intensive review of the founding documents and the ideas that underlie their origins, quite literally the foundations of American democracy. Indeed, this summer, I, along with other UNC Asheville faculty, took on the mission of working to weave together a curriculum that included the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address, the letter from Birmingham Jail, and of course the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And we worked hard to meld them into already existing courses. In many cases, those documents and the ideas that they represent were already part of courses, but the goal moving forward was to truly make them all fundamental. I think we've done that in the 17 classes currently being taught with the Foundation of American Democracy designation. We'll continue in that pursuit into the spring of 2026 and onward. Looking back to the summer, on July 6th, I watched an interview on the Sunday morning news show, Face the Nation, with the documentarian Ken Burns. We all know Burns' work from the Civil War, baseball, the Vietnam War, jazz, country music. And there's many others. I was pretty amazed at the list. Next month, his 6-part American Revolution will be broadcast. In that Face of the Nation sit-down, Burns and the host, John Dickerson, discussed the perception that our nation is currently woefully divided. Burns suggested that we were also very divided in the time of the Revolution, but that, truth be told, we're always divided. Dickerson then asked, John Dos Passos said that in times when men feel quicksand under their feet, history is a lifeline from the past to the present. What lifeline do you see from the revolutionary period? If we're always divided, what's the lifeline to the present from the revolutionary period? Burns replied, and forgive me as I paraphrase ever so slightly from the actual transcript, being very, very careful, like historians are, not to alter the meaning. We're the only country that knows exactly when it was born, and we're a country that's held together not by language, not by religion, not even by geography. We're held together by words. Given our increasing focus on the foundations of American democracy and the documents that make up that foundation, Burns's words struck me as quite valuable. So I went searching for other occasions when a similar sentiment had been expressed. Interestingly, In 1952, while giving the commencement speech at Little William Woods College in Fulton, Missouri, a young Ronald Reagan, then president of the Screen Actors Guild, but still many years distant from the White House or even the California governor's mansion, asserted that America is less of a place than an idea. He would continue with that theme for the rest of his career, reprising it in his farewell address in 1989 after 2 terms as the nation's chief executive by elaborating, America is freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise. More modern politicians have echoed parallel sentiments. In 2008, a newly minted Democratic senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, struck the same theme. In no other country on earth is my story even possible. It's a story that has seared into the fabric of our nation, a belief that is based not on race, not on religion, not on geography, but on an idea. Speaking from the other side of the aisle in 2016, Republican Congressman and House Speaker Paul Ryan agreed with President Obama when he pronounced that America is the only nation founded on an idea, not an identity. That idea is the notion that the condition of your birth does not determine the outcome of your life. Scholars have long hit upon this way of seeing the United States as well. In the American Political Tradition and the Men Who Made It, published in 1948, the historian Richard Hofstadter said simply and cleverly, "It has been our fate as a nation not to have ideologies, but to be one." In the years since, other scholars have made similar observations. In 2005, law school professor and constitutional expert Akhil Reed Amar wrote that America is not just a place, it is an idea, a set of principles about liberty, equality, and democracy embodied in our Constitution. Even more recently, in a 2018 interview, the historian Jill Lepore observed that it's not every nation that's founded on a set of ideas as opposed to common language or shared ancestry or particular attachment to a place. The United States really is founded on these ideas, and it only kind of continues to exist and to be nourished so long as we hold these ideas. The Federalist Papers were written in 1787 and 88 by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay to convince their countrymen that adopting the Constitution was the right path to a strong and just government. Last week, as my students and I spent time with the Federalist Papers in a humanities class, some of you are here, I was floored by the power of a single sentence that I had read previously, but as can so often be the case when reading the classics, one can be struck by not only their historical context, but their pertinent presence in one's own time. This is the timelessness of great ideas. These are the lines that captured me. It has been frequently remarked that it seemed to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. This is the first lines of the Federalist Papers, Federalist 1. Here Hamilton permanently juxtaposes the thoughtfulness of reflection and choice with the brutishness of accident and force, calling for ideas to win the day for the good of one and all. The story of American constitutional democratic republicanism is rooted not only in its own historic documents, but also in a very rich tradition of ideas that stretch back through centuries of political thought and philosophy. From ancient notions of liberty and justice through Enlightenment principles to the bold assertions of rights in the Declaration of Independence and the foundational framework of the Constitution, these enduring ideas have operated to bind the nation together. Now, Today, I want to turn to an exploration of how these powerful words and concepts continue to shape the ongoing journey toward freedom, equality, and a more perfect union. But first, a narrative. As I was preparing these remarks, I fell just a little bit down a historic rabbit hole regarding the very history of Constitution Day itself. First of all, how many of you knew or know that today's federal observance is actually titled Constitution Day and Citizenship Day? How many of you knew that? Not many. This rather long and awkward designation comes to us by virtue of a U.S. Congress Joint Resolution of 1952. The reason for choosing September 17th is obvious. On this day in 1787, 39 of the Constitutional Convention's 55 delegates signed the United States Constitution at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. But the story can be a bit complicated. The observance we now call Constitution Day and Citizenship Day has a layered and evolving history that I would argue reflects changing national priorities and understandings of civic identity. While there were celebrations and recognitions of the day that the Constitution was signed, dating at least back to 1911 in public schools in Iowa, or in 1917, the 130th anniversary of the signing, when there were rumblings of the promotion of a holiday, there had been a celebration organized by a Polish immigrant, Mrs. Paul Dontrang Sager, in Huntington, New York in 1938. And in 1939, the town of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, celebrated the newly acquired right to vote of 350 21-year-olds. Publishing mogul William Randolph Hearst heard about the Wisconsin Festival and set about promoting it in his national newspaper network, deeming it an idea worthy of emulation. The idea was certainly picking up steam. The first official version of the holiday began in 1940 when Congress established I Am an American Day. This celebration was set for the third Sunday in May and designed to recognize and honor new citizens, both naturalized and native born, as they came of voting age. President Roosevelt declared I Am an American Citizenship Day, an official holiday. In his accompanying proclamation, President Roosevelt described the purposes of the day to be in order that the sovereign citizens of our nation be prepared for the responsibilities and impressed with the significance of their status in our self-governing republic. This is a tenuous connection, to be sure, but recognized as the origin of the sequence that ultimately landed us in our present configuration. Historian Christopher Capozzola argues that the date in the month of may have been chosen to serve as a distraction away from the lingering May Day observations associated with international workers and leftist causes. 12 years later, in 1952, Congress revised the observance. Through a joint resolution passed on February the 29th, 1952, lawmakers renamed I Am an American Day as Citizenship Day and moved the date to September 17th, as you know, the date of the signing. The change in both name and date was meant to deepen the holiday's civic significance, connecting the celebration of citizenship more explicitly with the founding principles of the Republic. Many years later, in 2004, the holiday was expanded again when Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia added an amendment to a federal omnibus spending bill. That amendment officially renamed the observance Constitution Day and Citizenship Day, and it included a new requirement. Any educational institution receiving federal funds must hold an educational program about the Constitution on September 17th each year. The law also helped establish the broader Constitution Week, which runs annually from September 17th to September 23rd. Thus, while the holiday was once observed in May under the name I Am an American Day, it has, since 1952, been tied to September 17th and eponymously linked to the Constitution itself. The 2004 changes simply made the connection more explicit and educational. What may appear at first to be an inconsistency is in fact a historical evolution of a single civic tradition that has carried different names and emphases over time, but always with the central purpose of honoring American citizenship and the constitutional framework that sustains it. More recently, Executive Order 14190 of January 29, 2025, titled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling, states under additional patriotic education measures that all relevant agencies shall monitor compliance with Section 111B of Title I of Division J of Public Law 108-447. The name I Am an American Day of the first observance says a good deal about the historical context. It was 1940, and the nation was perched on the precipice of full engagement of what was rapidly developing into a global conflict in Europe and Asia, pitting both the capitalist and the communist world against the fascism of the Axis powers. The broad embrace of I Am an American Day under the aegis of the Immigration and Naturalization Service was so obviously a juxtapositioning of the melting pot concept against the racism foundational to the designs of Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese Empire. A good deal of the promotion behind the holiday was the work of Arthur Pine, a Brooklyn-born son of Polish-Russian immigrants, who had become a hustler in the world of finance, advertising, music, and entertainment. By the tender age of 22, young Pine, born Pincus, had become the agent for a band leader named Gray Gordon, who had a song, you guessed it, called I Am an American. We're going to listen to that song right now. Here we go.
We present today a guest star. You'll forget who all the rest are when you meet this man. And now at last you can. So prepare to do your cheering, for the next voice you'll be hearing represents a truly great American.
On the street, in the home, in a crowd, or alone, just wherever you may be, I am an American. I am from the heart of me. Rich or poor, young and old, let this message be told, just wherever you may be. I am an American. I'm proud of my liberty. In the factory, in the mill, through each valley, from each hill, raise your voice and give America a thrill. On the farms, in the schools, show the world we're no fools, just wherever you may be. I am an American.
So am I. I'm an American. Me too.
I, too, am an American. And although I'm no man, I'm for you, Uncle Sam. I'll shout wherever I may be. I am an American.
I am from the heart of me.
And although I'm no lad like my brother and my dad, I'll shout wherever I may be. I am an American.
I'm proud of my liberty. In the factory, in the mill, through each valley, from each hill, raise your voice and give America a thrill. On the farms, in the schools,
Show the world that we're no fools. Shout wherever you may be.
I am an American. I am every part of
Let us fervently hope that the spirit of this song will reach into the heart of all America.
There we go. So that song clearly echoes, resounds of World War II musical arrangement. In reality, it would be another year before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and U.S. entry into that conflict. That said, England and France had been embroiled in the fight for over a year themselves since the German invasion of Poland in early September of 1939. The songwriting team of Ira Schuster, Paul Cunningham, and Leonard Whitcup were the children of immigrants and worked and thrived within the immigrant-fueled creative tradition of New York City's Tin Pan Alley. That gives added meaning to the patriotic nature of this 1940 hit song, especially as it emerged during a time of global instability, serving as a counter to the dark forces afoot, even in the United States, of nativist xenophobia. Popular music wasn't the only way that the federal government, by way of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, worked to grab the ear of the population. On May 4th, 1940, the INS hit the radio waves with, you guessed it, I Am an American. The show ran sporadically from 1940 through 1943 and presented a message that the American way of life was superior to foreign alternatives. Immigrants who had migrated to the U.S. were interviewed to make that point. For example, on June 22nd, 1940, the immigrant interviewed was Albert Einstein, who was asked why he left Germany and settled in the U.S. He explained, "As long as I have any choice, I will only stay in a country where political liberty, toleration, and equality of all citizens before the law is the rule." Einstein continued, he said, "America will prove that democracy is not merely a form of government bound to a good constitution, but also a way of life supported by a people who have a good tradition, a tradition of moral strength. And the fate of the human race is more than ever dependent on its moral strength today." Dr. Einstein earned his citizenship on October 1st, 1940. Just like the holiday itself, the radio show I'm an American was designed to promote national unity. But what made it stand out was how it did that. It didn't push for strict assimilation. Instead, it offered a vision of America as a nation made stronger by the variety of its citizens, a collection of different people, cultures, and traditions, all contributing to the greater good. I Am an American became part of a government-wide effort to mobilize national morale behind the cause of national defense. One of the show's most well-known guests was First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. which she made the point by urging immigrants to never forget your own cultural background and to use that background, the skills, the stories, the culture, to enrich what you gain in the United States. In other words, being American wasn't about leaving your identity behind. It was about adding it to something bigger. But there was a caution, too. The program also reminded listeners that totalitarian regimes, like those the U.S. was fighting in World War II, would try to exploit ethnic divisions to turn America against itself. So while celebrating differences, I'm an American also stressed the importance of shared unity, especially across ethnic lines. That balance of pride in one's heritage and commitment to a common civic identity was at the heart of the show's message and of many larger national conversations during the war. Well, with radio in the entertainment queue, in 1944, Warner Brothers released a short film titled I Am an American that was shown across the country as part of the national celebration of I Am an American Citizenship Day, which that year fell on May 21st. The film, historically clumsy by modern terms, told the story of mid-1800s newlywed Polish-Ukrainian immigrants Theodore and Maria Kanowski, and that family's sacrifices made over the generations in times of war. Included in the film is a roll call of famous Americans who were not born in the U.S., like Knute Rockne, Jay Silverheels, and Arturo Toscanini, or who were the children of immigrants like Danny Kaye and Victor Mature. The film wasn't just entertainment, it was a statement. It was part of a coordinated national effort to unify Americans during World War II, at a time when democracy itself was under threat around the world. This film, along with parades, school assemblies, editorials, and radio broadcasts, reminded the population that America was a country made up of immigrants and their children and their grandchildren. This is a newspaper shot, a photo from May 19th, 1944. The caption reads, I Am an American Day. Preceding I Am an American Day, celebrations which will be held throughout the nation on May 21st, these 7 soldiers recently became naturalized at ceremonies at Service Club Number 2 at Camp Berkeley, Texas. Part of 146 soldiers of 28 nationalities, they included left to right Private Dong E. Tao, China, Private Joe Jesus Garza, Mexico, Private Nels T. Johnson, Sweden, Private Charles Darling, Bahamas, Private Felix Raymer, Germany, T. 5th Grade Edward F. Bernacki, Poland, and Private Erwin H. Fowler, Switzerland. Other new citizens naturalized in the ceremonies came from, and this is a long list, from England, Canada, Italy, Austria, Norway, Irish Free State, Greece, Russia, Romania, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Portugal, Finland, Spain, Nicaragua, Switzerland, Latvia, France, the Philippines, Lithuania, Honduras, and Denmark. And it adds that before induction, Private Darling lived at 266 West 120th Street, 23rd Street, New York City, which is Harlem. The message that the shared identity of America is not about where you were born, but about what you believe in was a valuable asset in the hard times during the fight against fascism. So this title of the day, the radio show and the film, I Am an American, wasn't just a slogan for wartime unity. It was presented as a reflection of who we were as a nation. Now, in 1945, the United States and Allied forces brought down the Axis, but almost immediately that hot conflict transitioned into the Cold War, and the Soviet Union, an ally against fascism, turned into a superpower rival. Celebrations of I Am an American Day continued. In 1950, United States Senator from Maryland, Herbert O'Connor, noted in a letter to the editor published in newspapers across the nation that there was no more positive antidote for the poison of communistic doctrines than such a celebration O'Connor continued, "These ceremonies of rededication to ideals and institutions upon which this great nation is built are a valuable example of the type of positive counteraction to communist subversion, which is democracy's most powerful answer to its enemies of every tinge and persuasion." 2 years later, in 1952, a joint resolution passed in the U.S. Congress, and we've already mentioned that, and September 17th was designated Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. As I said, it's an awkward name, this double day marking, and the creation of it seems a bit clunky. The Citizenship Day part of the holiday received the most press at the time. Thank goodness for newspapers.com. But the commemoration of the Constitution was also praised in some places. Allaying the fears of the public, the Kokomo, Indiana Tribune promised that all of the traditional objectives, principles, and activities of I Am an American Day will be carried forward under Citizenship Day observances, with additional emphasis placed upon the significance of United States citizenship and the reciprocal rights and duties flowing from the Constitution. It's interesting to look in from afar, from today, some 75 years later, in fact, on the words printed and read by everyday folk about our founding documents and the freedoms and protections, the liberties that had been so contested, so challenged by that great run of troubles and quandaries that we would name as World War I, the global influenza epidemic of the 19-teens, the Great Depression, World War II, and finally the Cold War. Imagine. Celebrating immigrants, celebrating the Constitution with the dual preoccupations of those days, as was national unity. The commemoration of Constitution Day and Citizenship Day continued through the 1960s and the 1970s. The Daughters of the American Revolution, the National Realtors Board, and the Boys and Girl Scouts were particularly involved in the promotion of programs and parades over that period. Schools held essay contests, and local business groups pulled off luncheons where professors from nearby colleges and universities spoke. That said, there is but a single mention of Constitution Day in the Asheville Citizen-Times for the period from 1970 to 1979. Things were only slightly better in the 1980s. During that time, there were 2 newspaper mentions of local commemorations of Constitution Day in Asheville. There was, however, a very short and feeble national attempt in 1987 to hold a one-time Constitution Day celebration on the 200-year anniversary of the signing, but it did not pass in Congress. Ultimately, a celebration was held in Washington by the Reagan administration. In the years after the 1952 proclamation and creation of Citizenship Day, the celebrations seem to have faded in importance and notability. Now, we recall the 2004 mandate regarding federal funding in schools. We remember the recent executive order titled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling and reconfirming the educational programming required. Okay, so now having laid out what I think of as a very fascinating history of Constitution Day and Citizenship Day and the historical context in which we as a nation have journeyed together in getting here, I want to turn to the founding documents themselves. And there's the new title. And also returning to the theme, not that we ever truly left it, of that altered title, Words That Bind a Nation, from founding ideas to the Declaration and the Constitution. Reminding ourselves also of the assertions attributed to Ken Burns, President Reagan, Professors Hofstadter, Amar, and Lepore, President Obama, and Congressman Ryan, that we're the only country that knows exactly when we were born, and we're the country that's held together not by language, not by religion, not even by geography. We're held together by words. I'll add to the paean and to words and the ideas behind them. Indeed, under close inspection, Jefferson's, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, is itself a tribute to words that bind rather than ethnicity or blood or even religion or language, but the ideas that underlie the spoken and written words, or as Jefferson names them here, truths. Of course, in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, he asserts, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In that memorable passage, it is proposition that stands in for words and represents the idea. For Burns, words means the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers, Lincoln's speeches and writings, the prose of Frederick Douglass, the sermons of Martin Luther King Jr., just some of the many texts that define the American experiment and provide a shared reference point, even when contested, indeed a reference point for contestation. So in essence, unlike countries bound primarily by blood, land, or religion, America is bound by ideas transformed into words. Both the strength and the vulnerability of the United States come from self-evident truths. That said, it is almost always an argument about what those words and thus those truths mean. So let's turn to words, ideas, and truths, and a sampling of the underpinnings, and that requires turning to history. Tracing the evolution of our democratic ideals across time and space demonstrates that we are not simplistically a product of the so-called West, whatever that is. There is at least some irony there when we recall that that was a place that most undemocratically invaded and conquered the Americas in the names of multiple monarchs and royal families. Perhaps you have read the Epic of Gilgamesh. I know that many students in the UNC Asheville Humanities program have done so for decades. It is the world's oldest extant literary masterpiece, written in Mesopotamia in approximately the 13th century BCE, possibly even earlier. It is simply put a cornerstone of classical studies. In Tablet 2, the protagonist Gilgamesh addresses two assemblies, one of elders and another of young men, likely warriors, about his plan to seek out the monster Humbaba. Interestingly, those assemblies advise Gilgamesh to leave off the search, but he does not heed them. While not a democracy in any modern sense, was what was described in this over 3,000-year-old text clearly a deliberative body, actually a form of ancient democratic council? In the Historia de los Indios de la Nueva España, written by the 16th century Spanish friar known as Motolinía, who accompanied the Spanish conquerors as they invaded and subdued the indigenous peoples of what today is Mexico, that priest anthropologist reported that in the Central Valley, nearby the capital city of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, that the city-state of Tlaxcala was, and I quote, a republic governed by a council of elected officials known as Tuxtli, who were answerable to the common citizenry. Geographically, Tlaxcala is, in fact, a place at the very heart of America writ large. The entire hemisphere, from the Arctic Circle to northern North America to the furthest south of South America and Tierra del Fuego and the Cabo de Hornos. Thus, if one believes Motolinía's report, there in Tlaxcala, a representative assembly ruled the city-state, a foundation of democracy that predated the arrival of colonizing conquerors from any of the European empires of the 15 and 1600s, who after all brought only the rule of kings. This is the Hiawatha Belt, the reminder of the great law of peace. This image also appears on the flag of the 6 Iroquois nations. We view these images because far to the north of Tlaxcala, one of the most well-known examples of deeply democratic principles existed among the indigenous people of the Atlantic Northeast. There, the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Haudenosaunee, was guided in governance by the Great Law of Peace, which emphasized consensus building, collective decision-making, and respect for the individual. The Great Law's existence preceded the European invasion by decades, perhaps even hundreds of years. Historians argue that the example of this system influenced those that we refer to as our founding fathers, most prominently Benjamin Franklin and James Madison. Indeed, in 1988, the U.S. Congress paid tribute with a resolution which proclaimed that the confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by the Iroquois Confederacy, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. Of course, we know much about the contributions made in ancient Greece and then ancient Rome toward developing some of the principles of democracy. In Greece, the Athenian model contained aspects of civic engagement, provided for a fundamental equality before the law, and fostered the involvement of interest groups in debate and deliberation aimed at fairness in policy. From the Romans was passed along classic republican ideas about the confluence of popular assemblies and aristocrats, where balance might be struck, a balance ideally informed by a sense of civic duty and allegiance. Now, this is a first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Primarily written by Thomas Jefferson, it was greatly influenced by the ideas of John Locke, the author of the phrase life, liberty, and property, found in the 2 Treatises of Government published in 1690. Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why he did that, we have no definitive answer, as he never wrote further on it. Did Jefferson want to direct the message in this key document away from property and toward more spiritual or abstract things? Did he decide that property evoked slavery in a way that might be off-putting to the representatives from the colonies that relied on enslaved labor, thus stalling the entire independence process? After all, the Declaration was itself radical in proclaiming independence, so radical, in fact, that signers knew that the gallows would be their fate for such a treasonous act. And as Benjamin Franklin was said to have quipped, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." Of course, the writings of other Enlightenment thinkers played their roles in both the impetus for independence and the framing of the self-determination born of it. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract contributed the idea that consent of the governed is necessary to have actual legitimate government. Adam Smith brought to the table ideas on economic freedom, while Voltaire and Montesquieu each influenced thinking about civil liberties and especially checks and balances, respectively. And as we remember, Diderot was the great cataloger of ideas. Thomas Jefferson read all of these thinkers, as did the other members of the committee named to draft the Declaration. Those fellow committee members modified the Virginians' first draft to some degree, as did debate on the floor of the Constitutional Convention. Without a doubt, Jefferson did the yeoman's quotient of the drawing up the document, but a quick glance at his first draft and the final product reveals that it was indeed reworked in subtle but significant ways. So, draft over here, final version over there. You guys all know about drafting and final versions, of course. side by side. Over here, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for a people to advance from that subordination in which they have hitherto remained, and to assume among the powers of the earth the equal and independent station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the change. And then Jefferson's colleagues chimed in. When in the course, of course this is familiar, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. Returning to Jefferson's first draft, we continue with the preamble to the Declaration. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And then the version we know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The 5 words, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, when you read the entirety of that document, think about the words carefully and the discussions behind them. Think about the fact that this was a document agreed upon by a committee, a group of hard-headed, well-read, and quite ideologically eclectic men, the great majority of whom were of the elite and ruling class in their respective homelands, their states, towns, and regions. Also remember that every one of these men was fearful of what signing this document might mean for their lives and those of their families and friends, and yet they did sign, and not a single one ever recanted that signing. I love timelines. This is just for you to look at. The War for Independence began in April of 1775, and the Declaration of Independence was signed some 15 months later. By that time, battles like Bunker Hill and here in North Carolina, Moore's Creek Bridge had already been fought. The battles continued for the next 8 years until the Treaty of Paris ended most hostilities in the early fall of 1783. Along the way, the Articles of Confederation were created in 1777 and ratified on February 2nd, 1781. Note that we do not celebrate nor truly remember any date associated with the Articles of Confederation. Indeed, for years, the nation suffered under a weak and ineffective government, the Articles government, first with no binding document, and then effectively for 8 more years under the anemic Articles of Confederation, while simultaneously trying to maintain a struggle for independence from the British Empire. Finally, in March of 1789, the Constitution and Bill of Rights were ratified, inaugurating the genesis of the government of today. But we get ahead of ourselves there. This is an 1858 painting of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Constitutional Convention met during the War for Independence. The painting is by Ferdinand Richard, who came to the USA from Denmark. This painting hangs in the White House. The framing of the Constitution was actually something unexpected. Delegates from 12 states met in May of 1787 in Philadelphia. Most believed that they were gathering simply to modify in some way the existing Articles of Confederation. Remember that under the Articles, there was no chief executive, no president, nor a national judicial system. Judges and laws were all associated with individual states. Under the Articles, a single National Assembly was composed of a delegation of from 2 to 7 men from each state, but each state's delegation in turn had but a single vote. And to pass any matter, the tally had to be 9 of the 13 in favor. The members of that assembly were appointed by their state legislatures. So disunited, fragmented, and uncoordinated were the states under the Articles that they essentially fielded their own armies, while 11 actually outfitted their own navies. The so-called United States was a shaky alliance without the power to defend its borders effectively by land or by sea under the Articles. European empires looked upon the new country as ripe for the picking, or the repicking as the case might be. Fishing rights off the coast were routinely violated by foreign powers. Great Britain continued to maintain forts on U.S. territory, and the vital port of New Orleans on the Mississippi River leading into the Gulf of Mexico was precariously defended and mainly useless to the economic interests of the U.S. citizens. As you can see by this map, the mishmash of land claims making up U.S. territory was yet another form of fallout that the weak Articles was simply not equipped to handle. Now, back to the narrative of the Constitution. As the delegates from 12 states settled into their places in Philadelphia's Independence Hall on May 25th, 1781, almost immediately the agents from Virginia, James Madison and Edmund Randolph, proposed a significant change to the arrangement. It's kind of a switch and bait. One that called for a two-house or bicameral Congress elected on a proportional basis calculated by state population or even by property taxes paid. In particular, population-determined representation was a new proposal before the body. Remember that under the Articles, each state, no matter its population or size, received one vote. The Virginians also signaled that they wanted an elected chief executive as well as an appointed judicial branch. The Madison and Randolph scheme, or the Virginia plan, was then soon melded into the Connecticut Compromise, in which the current structure of Congress today was mainly created. A Senate in which states are provided equal representation regardless of population, and a House in which representatives are allotted based on population. There were accommodations to the Connecticut Compromise centering primarily on two issues, slavery and proportional representation. In question were the concerns of northern states where slavery was slowly being abolished and southern states whose agricultural economies depended on enslaved labor. The issue of proportional representation was of similar concern to less populous states, which under the Articles had the same power as the large states. To satisfy interests in the South, particularly in Georgia and South Carolina, the delegates agreed to protect the international slave trade, that is, the importation of enslaved Africans, for 20 years until 1808. Slavery was protected further by allowing states to count 3/5 of their enslaved residents as part of their populations for the purpose of representation in the federal government. With these measures in place, the delegates in Philadelphia adopted the Connecticut Compromise. While these compromises held the Union together and aided the Constitution's ratification, slavery continued for 7 more decades. And the less populous states continue to this day with disproportional representation in the Senate. Because of the provisions related to slavery, the Connecticut Compromise has been called by many the Dirty Compromise. Another detail in the compromise was a sticking point. Coming so close following the long War of Independence from monarchical rule, the idea of a single man sitting in a powerful executive position was a difficult one for many to stomach. The delegates worried about how to protect the president from becoming corrupt or attempting to gain undue control over the other branches of government. A new king was unacceptable. They endlessly debated these questions. Eventually, they decided that the president would be elected by a special electoral college The idea being that the integrity of multiple electors could potentially block an illegal power grab or bad judgment from the citizenry. The Constitutional Convention next needed each state to ratify the new plan, so it was sent out to special committees, conventions in each state. Opponents and proponents of the Constitution organized and began to make their arguments by way of pamphlets in the press. The pro-Constitution faction was known as the Federalists, and those contesting its passage, the Anti-Federalists. Citizens debated the merits of the Constitution in newspaper articles, letters, sermons, taverns, and newfangled coffee houses across the 13 states. Some of the most famous and most important arguments came from Hamilton, Jay, and Madison in the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were intended to convince the citizens of the crucial and yet undecided state of New York that the Constitution was the best idea. In their time, hardly sacred documents, but rather in-the-moment political philosophy, they appeared in the press at the pace of about every 2 or 3 days. There were 85 essays published over 210 days. The essays were designed to both sway the New York delegates to vote in favor of the Constitution, as well as to convince their constituents to beseech them to do so. Of course, in the years since, the Federalist Papers have become prime political science readings, and from them much can be learned about constructing a constitutional democratic republic for good or ill. And back to this quote from earlier. Heralding the seriousness of the moment for the world, Alexander Hamilton began the series on October 27, 1787 in Federalist I in the following way. After an unequivocal experience of the inefficiency of the subsisting federal government, the Articles, you are called upon to deliberate on a new Constitution for the United States of America. The subject speaks its own importance, comprehending in its consequences nothing less than the existence of the Union, the safety and welfare of the parts of which it is composed, the fate of an empire in many respects the most interesting in the world. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. The first crucial vote on the Constitution came in the early months of 1788 in Massachusetts. There, at first, the Anti-Federalists had the upper hand, but after weeks of debate, enough delegates changed their votes to narrowly approve the Constitution. That's why we call Massachusetts the first state. 1215. The first crucial vote on the Constitution. The Massachusetts also approved a number of proposed amendments to be submitted to the Constitutional Convention. This pattern, ratifying the Constitution but attaching proposed amendments, was followed by other state conventions. By July 2nd, 1788, 10 states had ratified the Constitution, meaning that the document was essentially in effect. Now read through this. Each line is full of meaning. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, the Constitution itself contains 7 articles. A synopsis of the focus of each is shown here. This is quite a bit more. There is quite a bit more to them. Still, though 9 states had made the Constitution the law, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island had yet to complete their ratification conventions. Anti-Federalists were still arguing that the Constitution would lead to tyranny in June of 1788. Following that, the New York Convention ratified the Constitution by 3 votes. The Tar Heel state ratified the Constitution by a vote of 194 to 77 in November of 1787. North Carolina was the 12th state to ratify. Finally, Rhode Island ratified by 2 votes in May of 1790, a full year after George Washington was inaugurated. As had been the requirements of several of the states, a Bill of Rights was to be added. Those 10 amendments were added as promised in 1791. Here, as with the 7 articles of the Constitution, you can see a synopsis of the function of each of the 10 amendments. To date, there are 17 additional amendments to the Constitution, the latest being the 27th, which states that a sitting Congress cannot give itself a raise. So let's return to where we began. We're a nation not held together by blood or soil, not by shared religion or even a shared language. We are held together by something more fragile and more powerful: words. Words debated, written, revised, signed, ratified. Words contested, challenged, reinterpreted, and amended. But words that bind. As we've seen, the Constitution itself reflects this paradox. It is both a founding moment and an open invitation to argue, to improve, to include. We've amended it 27 times, including the 21st, to say quite literally, we changed our minds. That's not a sign of weakness. That's the design. That is what democracy looks like: principled, messy, evolving, a constitution written to be rewritten, not in its core ideas, but in its reach. So where is the beyond, if not already built in? As Ken Burns put it, we're held together by words. And as long as those words remain not just on parchment, but in our classrooms, in our conversations, in our courts, and in our communities, then the lifeline from the founding to the future is unbroken. The words still bind. And the work, our work, continues. Thank you.